Let's make some simple neon signs in Blender using geometry nodes. So first of all, let's select everything and press H to hide it. Next, we are going to press Shift A and go to Mesh and add a plane. Let's go into the geometry nodes tab and let's change this one to the 3D viewport also. We'll keep it on the top view. You can see the Z here in the center, that means it's looking from the top view, and we can use this one to see from various angles. Now you can also see the shortcuts here as well. So let's click on plus to add a new geometry node network. Let's move this up so we can see it better, and we don't need the group input now, but we will need it later. So let's disconnect it and keep it aside, and let's make some space for our network. So first of all, what we are going to do is press Shift A and add a string node. Input constant string. Let's add my channel name here, and let's connect the string to the geometry. So you'll see that it goes red and it does not connect. What we need is to convert this string into actual geometry. So what we'll do is add a string to curves node. String to curves node. And let's connect this string to here. Let's connect the curve instances to the geometry, and you can see we have some font. Now let's change some of these settings. Let's align the text to center so it's centered on our mesh, because if we go into the edit mode, you can see we still have the plane intact. Next, you can change the size from here. So let's reduce it to 0.5 for now, and you can change other settings from here like character spacing, word spacing, and line spacing if you have multiple lines. So let's undo that and keep it to the default settings. Now we have the text here, but we actually wanted to have some thickness or some actual geometry. So for that, we will convert this into a mesh. So let's take a curve to mesh node and plug it between these two. Next, we need a profile curve. So we'll just use a simple curve circle for it, and then connect this curve to the profile curve. Now you'll see it goes bizarre, but this is because the radius is set very high. So let's reduce the resolution to 8 and set the radius to 0.01, and you will see that we have some thickness on the curves. So you can change it to 0.02 also. So let's keep it 0.015. I think, yeah, that looks better. And if you ever want to change the font, you can actually click on this button. It will open the font library, and you can just select any font you want, or you can just keep it to the Blender regular font. It works pretty well. So this is perfect if you want just a basic sign, but let's add a little more to it. Let's add a join geometry node and place it right before the group output and connect our initial group input to this geometry. So now we have our initial plane and we have our text that is converted to mesh. So let's move this text a little bit higher. Let's keep this view like this, and the top view is visible here. So after this curve to mesh node, let's add a transform geometry node, and let's put Z as 0.3 meter. So you'll see that it lifts up the text by 0.3 meters. Next, what we're going to do is project some lines from here which connect to these signs, so it will look like it's supported by beams or pipes. Let's make some room for it, and we'll work with this group input geometry now. Let's add a distribute points on faces node. Next, we are going to scatter some curve lines from these points. So add an instance on points node, and we'll add a curve line as the instance. So Shift A, search, and add a curve line. Connect this curve to the instances, and now we have curve lines emitting from the plane. So you'll notice that the plane is gone, but let's say we also want that. So just take this group input geometry and connect it to the join geometry at the end, and you have the plane now as well. And if you remember the last tutorial, you can just press shift, right click and drag to create a connection like this, and then you can just press G to move it, so we don't get confused. Next we want some more lines emitting from here, so let's increase this density to 200, and now we have a lot of lines here. Now if we go to the top mode, you'll see that the plane dimensions are very large and the text is not the same as it, so we can just go into edit mode, press A to select all, press S and Y to scale it in this direction, and let's just keep it like this for now. Next what we'll do is change the curve line height to 0.3 meters. So this is equal to the height by which we transformed the text. So if we move this more up, we also need to move this more up. So let's keep it to 0.3 for both of these now. Now what we need is to select the region from where these curves are emitting. So we don't want these lines everywhere. We just need the region which overlaps with this text and this board. So if we had, let's say if we had to project something from the top, that would be the region where the shadow of this text forms if we shine a light directly from over it. So it's a bit harder to explain, but let's see how it's done. It's actually really simple and not that hard, but let's make some space for it. Let's move all of our setup to the side and let's add a realize instances node after these curve lines. So what it will do is it will turn this into actual geometry so we can manipulate them later. Next we need to add a ray cast node, and let's connect this geometry from realize instances to the target geometry. Now what it will do is send rays in the negative Z direction and tell us where these are touching the text or the mesh turned from the text. So we actually don't want the rays to go into the -1 direction, which is by default. We need them to go in the positive Z direction, which is 1. So that means they go from bottom to up. So we'll use this is hit, that means whichever ray is hitting the text object. So let's connect this is hit to the selection of distribute points on faces node. So you'll see suddenly everything is gone and no ray is being emitted from this plane. So let's change the C to see if we get something. So no, we get nothing from here. So a possible case for that is we lack geometry on this plane. So let's add a subdivide mesh node and we'll just change the geometry, take the geometry input from here and connect it to this distribute points on faces node. So you'll see that we get some arrays. It's not actually what we want right now as well. So let's increase the number of the subdivisions. So let's make it 6, and now you'll see that we are only getting those rays which are hitting the text. So next we need to actually change the size of this plane. So we go into the top mode using the 7 key on the numpad, or press Z right here, and then let's click on tab to go into the edit mode and S and X to scale it on the x-axis, and let's just move it a little bit higher on the y-axis as well, so just it's centered. So now if we see, we have some curve lines going out from the plane only to the places where the text is present. So without this selection we get instances from everywhere, but if we connect this is hit output, we only get lines from where it will hit the text or which is in our target geometry. So let's move the nodes a little so it's better to see. And the last thing we'll do, let's press shift and right click and drag and move this node out a bit so it's a bit better to see. So last thing we'll do is give some thickness to these. So you already know how to do it. We'll just add a curve to mesh node after the instance on points, and we'll add a curve circle as the profile curve. So always remember, if you don't want this type of effect, reduce your radius to 0.001, let's say. Not 0001, let's make it 0.005, and let's turn down the resolution to something like 8 because it's really thin and we actually don't need that thin. So I think it's a bit too far, so let's reduce the height to 0.15 for both the lines and the transform geometry. 0.15, and there we have our text. So for the materials, if you remember from the donut tutorial, if we select this plane and go into the materials and click new and add a material, it will actually not be applied. As you can see in the render mode, render preview, it's not actually applied to it. So what we need to do is add a set material node to all of the geometry we need to set a material for. So let's just create a 2 material setup. The first one will be a basic material, and click plus and click new and add a emission material. And let's add a set material node for all our geometry. Now we need to know where to add which material, so let's go step by step. So this is our input geometry, this is this plane, so we will add a set material and we will set it to the basic material. We cannot actually see anything, so let's press Shift A, light and an area light, and let's move it a little bit higher so we can actually see something. Next, let's duplicate this set material and add it here as well. So this is the instance on points from the curve line. So this is the support structures. Let's keep it to basic as well. And next, last one is this string output turned into text. So let's duplicate the set material and add it here, and let's make this the emission material. Now we haven't changed anything in the materials, so let's go to materials. For the emission, go into the emission and change the color to, let's say, blue, and strength to something like 5. Now it's not very much visible because we are in EV, so we need to turn on bloom, and let's turn on ambient occlusion as well, and we'll see it better if we go to the color management and make it medium high contrast. So you'll see it's better visible. Our emitter material is actually working. So if you don't want to work in EV, you can also go into cycles, change the device to GPU compute. Let's turn max samples to 32 and render samples to 128. And if, let's say, let's hide this area lamp so it's better visible. So now you'll see that this emission is actually working. Let's get a better color. Let's say you add it to something like a cube or a building. Now you have your own neon sign, which is actually procedural. So if you want some thickness to this plane as well, let's add it as well because it's not looking very good. Let's select our plane and let's add an extrude mesh node right next to this group input, and we'll offset it by 0.1 meters. Now let's go back in our modeling tab and you'll see that we have some thickness on the board, some supports, and our text, which is actually procedural. So let's go into the geometry nodes tab again and let's test it out. Find our string node and let's change it to something you'll really like. So if you enjoyed this, you can subscribe, and if you want to make some trees or a donut in Blender, you can watch these tutorials, and I'll see you in the next one.